My name is Ryan Matthews. I'm 28 years old, and this is how I took revenge on the man who called himself my father, cut me off the day I turned 18, and came crawling back when his empire started to crumble. I can still picture the moment, like it happened yesterday. I was sitting in my apartment, working on a pitch deck for my own company, when my phone lit up with a number I hadn't seen in a decade. At first, I thought it was a mistake, but then I heard his voice, that same deep, commanding tone that once dictated my entire life. I hadn't heard it in 10 years, and the first thing he said wasn't "How are you?" It was, "Son, I need your help." Just like that. No apology, no small talk, no acknowledgement of the years of silence. He went straight to business. That was my father in a nutshell. Asterisk, to understand why that call hit me like a freight train, you need to know who he was. My dad built his empire from the ground up, a self-made businessman who wore his success like armor and expected everyone around him to do the same. He believed in one thing above all else: kids need to toughen up. It was his mantra, his excuse for every cruel thing he ever did. Growing up, I lived in the shadow of his towering expectations. Nothing I did was ever enough. A 95% on a test. Why not 100? A basketball game won with my team. You could have scored more points. And when I tried to open up, when I told him I felt like I was drowning under his pressure, his response was always the same. Life doesn't care about your feelings, Ryan. Be a man. Asterisk, on my 18th birthday, he put his philosophy into action. In the most brutal way possible. We were sitting at the kitchen table. He slid an envelope across to me with my name written in his neat, blocky handwriting. I thought it was a gift. Maybe for once, a sign that he saw me as his son, not just some project to mold. But when I opened it, it wasn't money. It wasn't a letter. It was a single piece of paper that said, "You're on your own now." No explanation, no safety net. Just like that, I was cut off, financially, emotionally, completely. "It's time for you to make it on your own," he said. "This is how you become a man." And then he walked away, leaving me sitting there with my entire world shattered, wondering how someone could treat their own child like a stranger. Asterisk, I didn't hear from him again for 10 years. Not a call, not a text, not even a birthday message. And I learned to stop expecting anything from him. I built my own life. I clawed my way up from nothing, started my own company, and became someone on my own terms, someone stronger than he ever thought I could be. But when I heard his voice that day, begging me for a $500,000 investment to save his crumbling empire, something inside me shifted. After all this time, he needed me. The same man who had once left me with nothing now wanted me to bail him out. Asterisk, he had no idea the man I'd become, and no idea how much I'd been waiting for this moment. Asterisk. I grew up in a house where the lights were always on, the fridge was always full, and the silence could suffocate you. My father, Richard Matthews, was the kind of man who thought being feared was better than being loved. He started as a hustler, flipping properties and building small businesses from nothing, and eventually became the CEO of a mid-sized real estate empire. To outsiders, he was impressive, charming, powerful, the picture of self-made success. But inside our home, his charm turned to command, his power to control. He believed his word was law, and his favorite sermon was self-reliance. No one's going to hand you anything, Ryan, he used to tell me. If you want a good life, you fight for it. You earn it. No excuses. It sounded like wisdom when I was little. But over time, I realized it was just his way of excusing his lack of warmth, his refusal to be a father in any real sense. My mum, on the other hand, played the role of peacekeeper. She rarely challenged him. When she saw me hurting, she would pat my back and whisper, "Just do what he says. It's easier that way." And I did, for years. I was the sensitive one, the dreamer. While my dad wanted me to think in terms of profit margins and acquisitions, I wanted to create things, to design, to innovate, to build something meaningful. I was fascinated by design and business, not for the sake of money, but for the sake of making something beautiful that worked. My father mocked me for it. "You'll waste your life drawing logos for coffee shops." He once scoffed when I told him I wanted to study design and entrepreneurship. "You're a Matthews, you belong in real estate. My business will be yours one day if you can pull yourself together." But I didn't want his business. I didn't want to inherit his empire or his emptiness. What I wanted, what I needed, was to be seen, to be heard, to be accepted for who I was. High school was when I started realizing I might never get that. I excelled in my classes because I had to, but no A was ever high enough. I joined clubs and entered competitions, hoping he'd notice, but his attention was transactional. "You're a trophy when you succeed," I'd tell myself, "and a disappointment when you don't." I took on part-time jobs, tutoring, working at a local design print shop, anything I could find, and quietly saved my paychecks. I knew the day would come when I couldn't depend on my parents, and deep down, I suspected my father would make sure of it. That day came on my 18th birthday, and I can still feel the humiliation like it's fresh. We were at a fancy dinner he hosted, surrounded by extended family and some of his business friends. I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd use that moment to tell me he was proud. Instead, he stood up, tapped his glass, and made an announcement. "My son's a man now, and a real man stands on his own 2 feet. Then he looked at me and, with a smug smile, declared, "As of today, Ryan is officially on his own. Number. More handouts. Time to earn his keep." The room laughed and clapped like it was some motivational speech. I wanted to disappear. It wasn't a conversation. It wasn't love disguised as tough guidance. It was a performance, a public cutting off meant to prove his point. After that, everything changed. I scraped by, working multiple jobs, waiting tables during the day, doing freelance design work at night. For a while, I even slept in my car when I couldn't make rent. My mum quietly slipped me a little cash whenever she could. But when my father found out, he berated her for undermining his lesson. He wanted me to struggle, and I did. But I also learned how to survive. I enrolled in community college, then transferred to a state school, paying my way through every class. I kept building my portfolio, taking on small design clients, networking with anyone who'd give me 5 minutes. I was exhausted, but for the first time in my life, I was working toward something that felt like mine. Fast forward to now, I'm 28, and my life is nothing like the one my father predicted. I built my own design tech company from the ground up, combining my passion for creativity with a sharp business strategy I developed by watching, ironically, how my father operated. I landed big clients, grew my team, and turned my company into a multi-million-dollar business. I live in my dream condo in downtown LA, surrounded by the kind of city energy I used to fantasize about as a teenager stuck in that cold mansion. I drive a car my dad once told me I'd never earn. I built everything I have without him. Maybe because of him, And now, the man who told me I'd sink without his support is the one drowning. And for the first time in my life, he's the one reaching out his hand, not to help me up, but to pull himself out. It was a Wednesday morning, just another day in my routine, coffee in hand, reviewing design mock-ups with my team over Zoom, when my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but something in me said to answer. And then I heard that voice. The same deep, commanding tone I hadn't heard in 10 years. The one that used to make my stomach knot with dread. "Ryan," he said, like no time had passed. Just my name, flat and casual, as if we'd spoken. Yesterday, for a moment, I couldn't even respond. I froze. 10 years of silence, of abandonment, of building my life without him, and his first words weren't an apology. They weren't "how have you been?" or "I'm proud of you." It was just "Ryan." And then, without missing a beat, he dove into why he'd called. "I'll cut to the chase," he said. "I need a partner. My company's in a rough spot. Market shifts, bad investments. You know how the game works. I need $500,000 to keep things running smoothly. I figured you'd want to help. It's an opportunity for you to work with me, to finally prove yourself." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I sat there in my chair, staring out at the skyline, gripping my phone so tightly my hand ached. He hadn't called to reconnect. He hadn't called because he regretted what he'd done. He needed money, my money, and the audacity of the way he framed it, like it was some gift he was giving me, an opportunity, a chance to work with him. As if I hadn't spent the last decade building something on my own, without his name, his resources, his approval. I didn't even realize I'd gone silent until he started filling the pause with more of his sales pitch. "Look, I know we've had our differences," he said, his voice almost dripping with false magnanimity, "but this is business. You're doing well, I'm sure. This would be good for both of us." Shock gave way to something hotter, sharper. Fury, after everything he'd done. After cutting me off on my 18th birthday like I was some expendable employee. After watching me sink or swim without once reaching out. He thought I'd just write him a check. Just like that. There was no acknowledgement of what he'd put me through. No apology, no humility, just pure entitlement. The man who once told me I'd never make it without him now wanted me to. Save him, and worse. He was trying to make it sound like he was doing me a favor. I finally managed to say, $500,000. You think I'm just sitting around with that kind of cash to hand over to you? I knew I had more than enough, but I wanted to hear how far his delusion went. He chuckled, actually chuckled, and said, "If you've really become the man you claim you are, this shouldn't be a problem. It's time you step up." That line hit me like a punch. It was the same condescending tone he used to use when I was a kid, the same way he made my dreams sound small, my accomplishments insignificant. I could feel my jaw tighten, my chest burning with the weight of every insult, every humiliation he'd ever thrown at me. I didn't say another word. I just hung up. My hands were shaking as I set the phone down, my mind a storm of anger and disbelief. But as I sat there, staring at my reflection in the black screen of my laptop, something else started to take shape. He thought he could call me out of the blue, demand $500,000, and I'd just fall in line. He thought I was still that powerless kid at the kitchen table, desperate for his approval. But I wasn't, not anymore. And as the anger settled into something colder, sharper, a thought formed in my mind, a plan. Maybe I wouldn't just reject him. Maybe I'd give him exactly what he asked for, just not in the way he expected. Asterisk. After I hung up on my father, I thought the anger would subside, but instead it simmered, deep and unrelenting. The sound of his voice lingered, pulling me back to memories I thought I had buried. I remembered being 14, sitting at the kitchen counter, sketching a logo for a school project. He walked in, glanced at my work, and laughed. "You think people pay for this crap? You're not an artist, Ryan. You're wasting your time. If you want to make real money, come to the office. With me, learn how the real world works." It wasn't advice. It was dismissal. I remembered the night before college applications were due. I told him I wanted to study design and business, a double major that lit me up inside, and he sneered. "Design? What? So you can make cute little posters? Stop embarrassing yourself. You belong in real estate. I'm offering you a future, and you're choosing to be a starving artist." Every dream I shared became ammunition for his ridicule. And then there was the day he finally kicked me out, not with care or concern, but with a cold finality that made my stomach turn. I was 19, still finding my footing, when he offered me a position at his company. I hesitated, told him I wanted to focus on school. "Then you're wasting your life," he spat. "Get out of my house. If you're too good for my help, then you don't need my roof." I packed my things in silence, my mother watching from the stairs, tears in her eyes but too afraid to say a word. Asterisk that night replayed in my mind like a broken record, and I realized something. Every wound I carried traced back to him. He had shaped me, but not in the way he intended. He broke me down so I'd need him, and when I didn't bend, he threw me out like trash. And now, 10 years later, he wanted me to save him. Asterisk when I told my mom about his call, she did what she always did, defended him. "Ryan, he's still your father," she said softly, her voice tinged with the same fear I remembered from my childhood. "He wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious. He's proud of you, you know. He just doesn't know how to say it." Laughed bitterly. "Proud? He hasn't spoken to me in a decade. He only called because he needs money." "That's not pride, Mum. That's desperation." She hesitated, then pleaded, "You've built a good life. Maybe you can help him. Just think about it." I shook my head. "No, he's just a man who abandoned me when I needed him most. He made his choices. Now he can live with them." Asterisk, but even as I said it, I felt the tug of something I couldn't name. Part of me wanted to hang up forever, to close the chapter and never look back. But another part, the part of me that still carried the humiliation of that 18th birthday dinner, saw this as a chance, not just for revenge, but for something deeper. Closure, a reckoning. Asterisk, I couldn't make any decisions until I knew what I was dealing with, so I started digging. Richard Matthews had always prided himself on his empire. The name he built from nothing, but what I found made my chest tighten. His company was in freefall, millions in debt, multiple lawsuits pending, and whispers of fraud from former partners. The rough spot he described was an understatement. He was drowning. His empire wasn't slipping, it was collapsing. And the worst part, he had no one to blame but himself. Years of arrogance, risky investments, and refusing to adapt to a changing market had finally caught up to him. The man who once told me, "You either evolve or die," had failed to take his own advice. Asterisk, that's when the idea crystallized. He wanted me to write him a check. But maybe this wasn't about the money at all. Maybe this was about control. About finally facing him on my terms, not his. For years, I had rehearsed what I would say if I ever saw him again. All the things I'd swallowed, the pain, the resentment, the desperate need to be acknowledged. I wanted him to hear it. But I wasn't that boy at the kitchen table anymore. I wasn't the humiliated kid being cut off in front of strangers. I was a man who had built something bigger than he ever thought possible without him. And now I had the chance to show him exactly who I had become. Asterisk, so I called him back. My tone was calm, controlled, almost curious. $500,000 is a big ask, I said. If I'm going to consider this, I need to know what I'm getting into. Let's meet in person. We can talk terms. He agreed instantly, eager, like a man who had just glimpsed a lifeline. Good, he said. I'll send my assistant to arrange it. The same old Richard, delegating, commanding, pretending to be in control when his whole world was falling apart. Asterisk, when I hung up, I sat in silence, staring out at the LA skyline, my reflection caught in the glass. I could feel the tension, coiling in me, fear, excitement, anger, all tangled together. This wasn't just a meeting, this was my moment, my chance to stand in front of him, not as the son begging for approval, but as the man who didn't need him anymore. I spent the next few days rehearsing what I'd say, imagining every scenario. Would I confront him outright, play along and let him squirm? I didn't know exactly how it would unfold, but I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't walk into that room as his son. I'd walk in as his equal, or maybe, for the first time in my life, as someone above him. Walking into my father's office felt like stepping into a ghost of the empire he used to brag about. The walls still had that rich mahogany paneling, the shelves still lined with awards and photos from his glory days, but the place was hollow, desks were empty, half the staff gone, and the hum of activity that used to intimidate me as a kid had been replaced by an eerie stillness. Richard stood near his desk when I entered, still dressed like the king of his crumbling castle. Crisp suit, gold watch, that same smug smile he used to wear when he had the upper hand. Ryan, he said warmly, as if the last 10 years had been nothing but a brief vacation. It's good to see you. I gave him a polite nod, masking the storm inside me. He still saw me as that boy from the kitchen table, the one desperate for his approval. He had no idea who I'd become. Asterisk, he launched straight into his pitch, pacing as he spoke, hands gesturing like he was still the master dealmaker. The market's been brutal, he said, his tone rehearsed, like he'd been explaining his downfall to himself in the mirror. But this is just a rough patch. With your help, with our combined skills, we can turn this around. This is an opportunity for you, Ryan, to step up, to finally work alongside me. I let him go on for a while, nodding like I was considering it, watching how easily he tried to slip into that old role of teacher, of savior. But then I cut him off. Do you remember what you told me on my 18th birthday? I asked quietly. He froze mid-sentence. You said I was on my own, that I needed to prove myself, that I'd never make it without you. Asterisk, he chuckled awkwardly, trying to brush it off. Come on, Ryan, that was just tough love. You're a better man because of it. Asterisk, I didn't let him finish. No, that was you abandoning me. That was you humiliating me in front of your friends so you could feel like some hard-ass mentor. But here's the thing, I did make it. Without you, I leaned forward, my voice steady, and now you're sitting here, begging me to save you. Asterisk, his face reddened, but before he could respond, I pulled out a folder from my bag and slid it across his desk. You didn't tell me how bad it really is, did you? I said. Inside were documents I'd spent the past week gathering public. Records, lawsuits, liens, proof of debts that went far deeper than he admitted. His hand hovered over the papers, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before: fear. You're not asking me for help, I said, my voice low. You're begging me to pull you out of the grave you dug for yourself. For a moment, the room went silent except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. The power had shifted, and he felt it. I could see the calculation behind his eyes, the way he was trying to regain control of the conversation, but I didn't give him the chance. Here's the deal, I said finally. I'll give you the $500,000, but not as your partner. I'll invest on one condition. You sign over full ownership of the company to me, effective immediately. The words hit him like a slap. He straightened, outrage flooding his face. Are you insane? This company is my life's work. My name is on those walls. You think I'm going to hand it over to you? His voice rose, but I stayed calm, letting his anger wash over me. I stood up slowly, gathering my folder. Then, good luck, Dad, I said, deliberately using the word like a stranger might, detached and cold. I survived without you. Let's see if you can do the same. I turned toward the door, my heart pounding but my steps steady. Wait, he said, his voice cracking. When I looked back, the transformation was staggering. The man who once stood over me like a giant was suddenly small, desperate, his bravado crumbling. Don't do this. We can work something out, please. The word please coming from his mouth almost stunned me. He had built his whole identity on power and control, and now, stripped of both, he was just a man, a broken one at that. I stood there for a moment, watching him. The same man who cut me off, who told me I'd fail without him, now standing on the edge of ruin, pleading with me for mercy. And in that moment, I realized I didn't need his approval. I didn't need his apology. I already had everything. I'd been fighting for power, success, freedom. He was the one who had nothing left. And for the first time in my life, I was the one who got to walk away. I didn't invest. I walked out of that office and let him sit in the ruins he'd built for himself. For weeks, I watched from a distance as his empire finally collapsed under the weight of his ego and bad decisions. The lawsuits piled up, creditors circled, and eventually, his company declared bankruptcy. That was when I made my move. Through a third party, I bought the business, or what was left of it, for a fraction of its original value. The same empire he used to lord over me, the one he said I'd never be worthy of inheriting, now belonged to me. Richard Matthews lost everything: his company, his status, the illusion of power he'd clung to his entire life. He was forced into an early, bitter retirement, retreating from the world like a man too ashamed to face it. And me, I didn't just take his company. I took back every ounce of power he stole from me that night at my 18th birthday dinner. I remembered sitting there, humiliated in front of his friends, feeling like I was nothing without him. But now, standing in my new office, the same one where he once looked down on me, I felt a different kind of weight. Not anger, not even vengeance, just freedom. I had one, on my terms. But I didn't rebuild the company to be what it was. I turned it into something entirely different, a space for young entrepreneurs, designers, and innovators like me, the ones their parents told them they'd never make it. I created incubator programs, mentorships, and funding opportunities for kids who just needed someone to believe in them. Every time I signed off on a new project or shook hands with a young creator who reminded me of myself, I felt like I was rewriting my own story and theirs. This wasn't just revenge anymore, it was transformation. My father built his empire on fear and control. I was building mine on possibility. And as I stood in that office one evening, looking out over the city, I realized I didn't need his approval. I never did. What I needed was this, the life I carved out with my own hands, proof that I was always enough. The office was quiet, the city lights spilling through the floor-to-ceiling windows as I sat at my desk, staring at the new company logo mounted on the wall. My design, my vision, the empire that once symbolized his dominance now stood as proof of my resilience. I leaned back in my chair, thinking about that scared 18-year-old kid, the one who packed his life into trash bags, who slept in his car between shifts, who thought he'd never escape his father's shadow. I closed my eyes and whispered to him, "We made it." It felt like the first time in my life I truly believed it. I thought about the man who used to tower over me, telling me I'd fail, that I couldn't survive without him. He was wrong. He cut me off, thinking I'd crawl back to him for help. 10 years later, he was the one crawling to me. But I didn't save him. I saved myself. And that's the best revenge I'll ever have. As I gathered my things to leave, I took one last look at the logo, a symbol of everything I'd built from the ground up, and let the truth settle in. He didn't just make me fight for survival. He taught me something he never intended to. He made me fight for survival. And in doing so, he taught me how to win without him.